Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're just going to let our participants arrive, and then we will get started. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Laurier EdTalks series finale. If tonight is your first, then thank you for joining us. And if you've been with us all along, thank you for supporting our series. My name is Mariah Baldacero, and I am the School Relationship and Outreach Coordinator for the Waterloo Public Library. And on behalf of Waterloo Public Library, I welcome you here tonight. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce Galen, who is going to introduce on behalf of Laurier.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Galen Naidu-Harris, and I'm Wilfrid Laurier University's Government and Community Relations Officer. And on Laurier's behalf, I want to extend you a very warm welcome to the latest and last in the series of EdTalks. I also want to acknowledge that we're virtually gathered on the Haldeman Tract, traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. This land is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples and symbolizes the agreement to share, protect their resources, and not to engage in conflict. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. Acknowledging them reminds us of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work. We recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we are now present. The theme of the session tonight has been reimagining education, and we hope that these talks, which we've put on through our Faculty of Education in partnership with the Waterloo Public Library, have been timely, relevant, and informative, whether you're a student, an educator, or just a member of the community that's joined us. Just for your awareness, I'll also add the event is being recorded and will be made available for folks to watch at their leisure on the EdTalks playlist on Laurier's YouTube channel after the event. I'll also add that there will be a question and answer period following the discussion. If you'd like to participate, we would welcome that. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time, but use the Q&A function, not the chat, because that'll be disabled. We'll do our best to get to any and all questions at the end of the discussion. So type them in as you feel ready to. And now I'd like to hand off to Dr. Maria Cantillini-Williams, who will introduce our panelists for the evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Galen. And thank you, Mariah, for hosting us on behalf of the Waterloo Public Library. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's session, which is called the Community School Initiative, Mitigating Opportunity Gaps Through Extracurricular Programs for Racialized Low-Income Communities. And this talk has been prepared by a panel, and our distinguished guests are going to share their insights. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ardavan Eizadirad, who is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education, our Faculty of Education at Wilfrid Laurier University. He's the author of a book called Decolonizing Educational Assessment, Ontario Elementary Students and EQAO, published in 2019. Also the co-editor of a book called Equity as Praxis in Early Childhood Education and Care, newly published in 2021. Ardavan is also the founder and the director of a consulting firm called Education, offering equity, diversity, and inclusion training to organizations and to various groups. We have also with us Brice Baartman. He is a Canadian South African student who recently completed his second year in the Bachelor of Education and Master of Teaching program at the University of Toronto. He has been working and volunteering with children and youth in under-resourced communities for over 10 years. Sally Abudiab is a Palestinian Canadian who has a Master's of Science from Rehabilitation Sciences Institute in 2019. She recently completed her Master of Social Work at the University of Toronto. She has experience working with organizations at various levels, including not-for-profits and government agencies. And last but not least, Devin Jones. Devin Jones is here with us. He is the founder of the Youth Association for Academics, Athletics, and Character Education. He's also an educator with the Toronto District School Board in the Jane and Finch community. His community work has been highlighted in the Toronto Star, the National Post, and the CBC. His commitment to community advocacy and activism extends beyond school boundaries and has inspired thousands of young people. So thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you again to our participants. And now I think we're ready to begin the presentation.
All right, thank you for that warm welcome. I will share my screen. We have a PowerPoint deck that will guide us, and we will share some of the links in the chat as well as we go along, including the research project website. So. All right, whenever you're ready, Sally.
Just we have those gray boxes that are perfect. Yep, just the one in the middle. Can you do anything about that one? Perfect. Good evening, everybody. We're excited to be here with you all and share the outcome of our project focusing on closing the opportunity gaps for racialized and under-resourced communities through the Community School Initiative. Our presentation will cover some of the fundamental information and background slides, and then with that, we'll move on to discussing our research project. So Maria has already given us a warm introduction. So with that, I would just like to also add and give thanks to the 4 Bachelors of Education students from Laurier for their help, as well as the youth, the parents, and the Spirit of Math staff for their engagement during our research team meetings and consultations.
So if you're wondering what is the Community School Initiative, we want to set the stage by showing a short video which kind of talks about the opportunity gap, and then bring it back to talk about the research project and its findings. So I will show you the video now. Oh, I think I have to come out and share again. Okay, here we go.
Between achievement level and young people's involvement in the criminal justice system. So we can see a disproportionate large number of young people who are not engaged in education, not engaged in training, or who, for the most part, grossly underachieve academically. Young people, especially kids from compromised communities, if kids from those neighborhoods have access to robust social infrastructure, expanded opportunities, being, they're playing hockey or they're playing structured basketball or there's someone micromanaging their academic trajectory, it's a lot more likely that those kids are going to be successful. What we have seen in COVID is the fact that young people growing up in those neighborhoods with a lack of access to any structured programming always get caught up in the acidity of the community that they live in. They live on the margins as opposed to being in the periphery of hope.
COVID-19 attacks our most underprivileged communities most. We were warned that through Toronto Public Health that multi-generational families were at risk, but we didn't realize that that would lead to our most underprivileged children not coming to school. We made sure to supply them with computers, we supplied with internet, and really just trying to anticipate what their needs will be and supply those underprivileged communities first.
The school boards have been quite good in ensuring that the kids have technology and they're given the resources, but kids from affluent communities can always find resources like tutors or people that can help assist. If you're a student and you're struggling with a concept, it requires someone to be there for you to assist you.
These are also the racialized communities. These are also the folks who have the highest proportion of essential workers working in the factories, working in long-term care and in hospitals and on the front line.
If parents aren't there to support these students online, those kids are not going to get the help they need to close that gap in achievement. When we started here in person in September and October, again, it was obvious that there are huge gaps in achievement.
It's going to be a challenge to reintegrate them and ensure that they haven't fallen behind. If children fall behind on literacy especially, and we don't catch them up, they will be behind for the rest of their lives.
We're going to have a large proliferation of young people we're going to be further relegated to the periphery if we don't put the appropriate mechanisms in place to address those gaps in achievement.
What we're seeing with low-income communities and racialized communities is that they have a higher proportion of challenges across poverty and education and food security, etc. We're advocating for a long-term strategy that makes sure that we're not returning back to kind of where we were beforehand. Whatever we do going forward needs to take into consideration the impact that COVID is having on those young people's lives, but it also needs to take into consideration, how we make sure that post the pandemic, those young people are stronger and better equipped to kind of navigate the new world that we'll be living in.
All right. So I think the video really set the stage well, and we're going to be talking about how the community school initiative was very intentional and how to mitigate the opportunity gap. So this one back here. All right, so just trying to put this away. Okay, so what you're wondering, what is the Community School Initiative? It's a partnership between YACE, which stands for Youth Association for Academics, Athletics, and Character Education, which is a nonprofit, and Spirit of Math, which is a for-profit entity offering extracurricular supplementary programs. The Community School Initiative was offered on evenings and weekends. It did go to different modalities due to public health guidelines. So start out in person, went fully online, and finished in hybrid format. And we'll talk about our findings along the way. But typically, accessing Spirit of Math programming as a private service costs around $3,000, where the program was subsidized and offered to residents of Jane and Finch for $100 per student. They were offered to students in grades 2 to 8 in different cohorts and classrooms based on abilities after doing some diagnostic testing. And it was supported by a team of caring adults, which involved parents, basketball coaches attending the classes, and Ontario certified teachers. And we have a research project website that we share in the chat, which has the final report called the communitysschoolinitiative.com, which also has resources, literature reviews, and recordings of our symposium hosted in February. I'll pass it on to Devon Jones. Not able to hear you?
You're on mute, Mr. Jones.
I'm still not able to hear.
Okay, good. That's better now. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of being a teacher in Jane and Finch for over 2 decades, and the achievement gap is a huge issue. Not only the achievement gap, but the symbiotic relationship between the achievement gap and this and the school to prison pipeline. So low achieving schools, a large number of young people disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system has caused us to seek to address the issue earlier than later. So we don't want to find out in grade 12 that a student is grade levels below or has achieved a few credits, or they're in grade 8 going to high school and they're 4 or 5 grade levels behind. So the objective of the community school initiative is to target those students who are grossly underachieving and to address those gaps in achievement. As you can see by the existing data, it shows that as per the EQO test and other measurements, it shows that the students in this neighborhood are some of the lowest achieving, the students in our system, most of them being Black and racialized students. So this initiative, it's unique, it's forward thinking, and it's relevant based on the fact that we've seen the almost tragic outcomes when children and youth, when our Black students are on the periphery, or they've grossly underachieved. We're seeing the transition into the criminal justice system and the huge impact that has on public safety. And we're trying to mitigate that through this initiative. Yeah, our organization, YACE, provide a plethora of services, but we want to make sure through this initiative, we want to make sure we address the question of access. So, the kids, not the student attended, nothing was paid for. We addressed all these costs, and they had meaningful engagement. We're very diligent and meticulous about the way curriculum was delivered and the way we stewarded the students through this process. So YACE as an organization in this community seeks to make sure we address the proverbial elephant in the room, which is access. So like Ardavan alluded to, the cost of this program is close to $3,000 or $4,000, not to mention the other programs that YACE offers around support and so on. We make sure that students can attend without having to pay for these programs.
So I'll just give a brief research overview. So the efficacy and outcomes of this initiative were assessed through surveys that we did with YACE parents and students, 33 each, and also 4 teachers. We also conducted a focus group with 7 teachers who were delivering the Spirit of Math curriculum. We conducted a literature review as well. This can be found in detail on our website. We'll link it in the chat at the end of this presentation. And our data was mostly collected between June to July 2021, and responses were examined using a thematic analysis as methodology from a critical race theory paradigm. So our main 3 objectives here were to assess the effectiveness of the initiative as it transitioned from in-person to remote delivery because of the COVID health protocols. Also to identify the barriers that were preventing access and engagement in YACE's remote learning programs, which we'll go over in a few slides, and to identify effective remote instruction programming and pedagogies that could supplement the education programs that were being offered by YACE. And I'll pass it on to Dr. Eizadirad to give a brief history of the Jane and Finch neighborhood.
All right, wonderful. So I think, if you're not familiar with Jane and Finch, you probably heard of the name, but we're going to provide a little bit of a historical perspective to kind of understand how the neighborhood developed its reputation, and kind of provide some context around demographics, because I think it's really important to the discussion and the purpose of the initiative. So in 1954, there was a large investment to build more affordable housing in the suburbs at a rapid rate. So even though now Jane and Finch is considered a very urban community, it was a suburb at the time, predominantly used for farming, right? There was extensive building of high-rise apartments and townhouses in the area. In 2005, the city of Toronto identified the Jane and Finch community as part of its 13 priority neighborhoods, which incent is deficit thinking, and labeled the community. In 2014, 9 years later, they recognized that and they renamed the program to Neighborhood Improvement Areas and expanded it to include 31 identified neighborhoods. But some of the key things that happened when this massive investment in housing was happening, there wasn't much thought to the infrastructure and the sense of community that will be built, particularly around access and affordability. So it was a linear style of hollow urban planning. And as a result, the Jane and Finch population expanded from 1,300 approximately in 1961 to 33,000 10 years later. And during that 10-year period, there was establishment of 21 high-rise apartment buildings in the neighborhood. The neighborhood has an approximate population of 80,000, probably more now. That's based on 2008, living in the area, and spanning 21 kilometers squared with an average population density of approximately 4,000 people per kilometer squared, which reflects a lot of housing within apartments and community housing projects. So if you're a visual learner, that was actually Jane Street and Finch Street in 1957, which is really not that long ago when you think about it. And as you see, it was a suburb, but not necessarily much development there at the time. Fast forward, here's another comparison, 1962 to 2022, which tells you how much fast the urban development occurred. But as I said, and we'll talk about the lack of infrastructure and urban planning for the sake of community building, it really contributed to some of the risk factors that have been developed within the space. And here's another one in terms of some quantitative statistics. The neighborhood has a high incarceration and police expenditure rate. When we look at the Fraser report rankings, which exclusively rank schools in the community based on how they perform in the last 5 years on EKO standardized test, we see a high school like Westview is ranked low. But when we compare it to the TDSP, the Toronto District School Board Learning Opportunity Index, which actually ranks schools based on the external systemic barriers impacting teaching and learning conditions, we see many of the schools in the neighborhood are ranked very high, meaning those systemic barriers actually impact student learning conditions. So Westview High School, Brookview Elementary and Middle School, Shoreham, Driftwood. In terms of demographics, we see there's a high percentage of families, single parent families, all right, total population 15 years over with no certificate, diploma or degree at 47%, so quite high. Unemployment is above national averages at 12.1%. And the median income of the households is about $37,000, which is just above the poverty income cutoff by the government. I will pass it on to Devon to cover a little bit about the history of YACE and the social inclusion framework now.
Yeah, so in 2007, we started YACE as an organization, primarily with the objective of ensuring that students had access, like not just to academic support and social infrastructure, but they had access to programming, recreational support, and primarily we're trying to bridge the divide between a polarized community that had a culture and a legacy of reciprocal and reprisal shootings. That's why the color of the logo is purple as it relates to getting the kids from both sides of Finch together, North and South, Crips and Bloods. Again, the organization existed in the center. The first year we ran a summer institute, we had close to 500 kids from both sides of Finch. We had staff from both sides of Finch, and that's the first time many of these students have coexisted in a meaningful way in the same space. And as I said, objective was to make sure that scarce programming was provided, irrespective of cost. We just did some research with Kids Consulting, and it showed that the income levels of the income based on the income level of families in Jane and Finch, only 3% of those students can afford to play organized sports, as opposed to those making over 100,000, where it's close to 72%. So you can see that there is an issue around access that we really need to address. And quantitatively and anecdotally, we can tell you that when children and youth lack access, there are more menacing alternatives that they're pulled into later on. YACE operational framework is predicated on the following: outreach and wraparound, that's our first pillar. The second pillar is the arts, athletics, and expanded opportunities. The third pillar is academic intervention. That would be initiatives like the community school initiative, the tutoring programs that we run, etc. Research and curriculum development. We do our best. We do our best to ensure that we document, we evaluate the research that we do. Advocacy, reflective services, and cultural consideration of care. We believe that the students in this community, they have very specific needs that we have to address, we have to pay attention to. Civic engagement, that's post-secondary apprenticeship, internship in the trades. Like, we're adamant that we have a partnership with the Pinball Clemens Foundation, and we cover the tuition of close to 15 students annually. And this is the 4th year we're doing this. So, close to 60 students that have gone on to the trades, post-secondary, or some apprenticeship because of the work we're doing in community. And outside of that project, we still streamline and push kids, students, I should say, into post-secondary, the trades, etc.
So we're going to shift from YACE and talk a little bit about our partner, Spirit of Math. So Spirit of Math serves an impressive 11,000 students across 40 campuses and is located in more than 20 cities across the world. They've been operating for 35 years as an innovative leader in mathematics education, offering a unique curriculum and system of after-school math classes for high-performing and gifted students from kindergarten to grade 11. We can actually skip this next slide because Brice has already given us really good an overview of our research objectives. So just before we get into our research findings, I'd like to take time to discuss the key points of our data analysis. And importantly, this research project was intentionally guided by tenets of critical race theory in education, given the demographics and our objectives. And throughout the project, we had regular team meetings with YACE, including youth and parent advisors who were selected in consultation and recommended from YACE from the community. In June and July, that's when we started getting busy with our data collection from students and parent surveys, which we administered through Qualtrics. And during this time, we also conducted a focus group with 7 of YACE's OCT certified teachers, just to better understand the strengths and challenges of the community school initiative. The research team, which included myself, Brice, and Dr. Eizadirad, then analyzed this data through codes and themes. And you can move on to the next slide. And here we have our 5 overarching findings from our research project, or the 5 overarching themes, which we'll discuss in more detail in the next few slides. But holistic and culturally relevant programming was one of them, structured programming, communication and parent engagement, the digital divide and inequality, and lastly, effective pedagogies. Pass it on to Brice now.
Sally. So one of the themes that arose was the importance of students receiving holistic and culturally relevant programming. The parents, students, and teachers as a collective consistently expressed through the interviews and the focus group that they felt that the initiative gave students who were struggling in the school system an opportunity to improve socially, emotionally, academically, and also gave them an opportunity to engage in sports and athletics through their basketball program. Parents expressed that they felt the learning environment was and welcoming by being family-centered, so similar to a community hub, and having the support of teachers as well as coaches, which is a big theme that arose, that reflected the cultural identities of the students, contributed to helping students and parents feel comfortable at YACE and like they could be themselves. And it served as a great alternative for a public school system that often lets students from Black communities slip through the cracks, as we saw from the EQAO data towards the beginning of the presentation. And we have a couple quotes from a parent and I believe a student on the next slide. So this quote by the student here, by the parent, kind of encapsulates a lot of the responses that we received from other parents, where they said how YACE supports in the development of creating lasting relationships while building social skills and demonstrating the importance of respect. The public school system often does not provide this, especially in lower income, predominantly Black communities. And then a student was saying how they like that YACE is supportive and helps with everything. So sports, school, character development. And we can go to the next slide. So one of our other findings was the importance of structured programming. So the Community School Initiative provided a structured math curriculum through the Spirit of Math to all participants in the programming at an affordable cost. This took the load off of teachers as well, because they were given lessons and a systematic way to teach and evaluate students' work rather than having to create their own lessons, which they would have to do in a regular classroom mostly. Each student was placed in a grade based on diagnostic assessments and then provided an individual binder to keep track of their progress. And after the program, many students actually reported improved confidence and attitudes towards mathematics and science, technology, engineering, and math. There were some challenges that we found especially from the interviews. So it wasn't all peachy, but the remote context made things a little bit difficult. So there were some Wi-Fi issues navigating the apps like Brightspace and other apps that were new to many people. Also less opportunities for the teachers to provide one-on-one help, but having subsidized structured programming that they were offering helped students gain access to technology and resources that they may not have had access to had it not been for the affordable pricing that YACE was offering, that higher income students would be able to afford. So here's just a few more quotes. One parent said, "YACE offers programs not only to enrich the community, but also the families living within it." A student says how the Spirit of Math program helped them in school. They raised their grades up to A's in math, now more organized, was never as confident at school before. And then one of the parents was saying how classes are too big for students who need more individual attention. So this initiative helps students to get that individual attention that they needed, especially when they were in person. And then Dr. Eizadirad is going to talk a bit about communication and parental engagement.
Great. So here we saw a little bit of opposing viewpoints between teachers and parents, whereas the parents felt they were constantly available for communication purposes. Teachers felt it was more sporadic and inconsistent and that it could have been improved. So kind of there was different subjective takes on that. Going to different modalities from in person to online. It was really important that the medium for communication remained accessible and user-friendly. When it went to a fully online modality, Brightspace as an online platform was used to teach, for students to submit assignments and completion of work. Emailing was used, phone calls, and what was really worked based on engagement with parents was WhatsApp groups as a form of communication. One thing that was diagnosed was students were completing their work, but them and the parents did not know how to upload it. And this was creating a gap in terms of providing a constructive, timely feedback to the students. So to mitigate that, once it was identified, how-to videos were created for how to submit assignments on Brightspace as well. Another theme was that giving timely feedback was more difficult in the context. For one reason was due to delays in receiving student work. And the other piece was when you were in person, you're kind of, as an educator, able to observe the emotions and the body language of students. In a setting where cameras were off, this did make it more challenging, but having coaches present did hold students more accountable. It created that continuity between education, sports, and what else was happening in the community. So as one of the parents expressed, they were not a frequent user of some of these virtual platforms. Hence, there was a bit of a learning curve in terms of figuring out some of those barriers and supporting the parents in navigating them. And as a teacher said, there's not a lot of parental engagement involvement at the older grades, simply because the curriculum is a little bit difficult. So what the teachers mentioned in the focus group was students who are starting out younger and are going to get more repetition within the Spirit of Math curriculum, they were able to transition easier, where for some of the older students who perhaps had exceptionalities and IEPs, this was a bit of a challenge in terms of that transition being smoother. Pass it on to Sally.
Thank you. So the fourth theme is related to digital divide and inequality. And so here's teachers specifically had difficulties supporting students who did not have adequate access to technologies and internet. And parents disclosed that they didn't have adequate study space, devices, or resources to support their children with remote learning. So there was really lack of support from both the parent side and the teacher side. But we wanted to note the particularly large number of parents and students who expressed in-person learning over remote learning with particular focus on things like technology to support their needs. And so 63% and 72% respectively. And here in the next slide, we have some sound bites. So a parent said that they needed a suitable environment without distractions, which is hard to identify at home. A student saying, if I was able to attend in person, I don't get distracted with my surroundings at home. And then a teacher saying the online aspect of teaching is very challenging as students can often have low bandwidths, making it difficult for them to participate. And our final theme here is related to effective pedagogies. And here we noticed that teachers, students, and parents all noted that the presence of coaches was helpful and increased engagement, especially when we went to remote learning. For example, when coaches were present in the virtual space, again, this was mentioned, student cameras were turned on more often, and there was just greater participation in online activities. In fact, 90% of parents agreed that coaches were critical in increasing student engagement. In the classroom, teachers also had to rely on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation to engage students remotely, such as additional drop-in support times and prizes for completion of work. So they had to kind of strategize what to do. And teachers also felt like alternating and using a combination of individual work and friendly cooperative academic competitions, and this maximized student engagement. In the next slide, we have some more sound bites. A student saying, remembering my goal to becoming an NBA player, I won't make it without good grades. This is more like personal, self-directed goals. And then a teacher saying the coaches helped huge in the aspect in getting them there and to help us monitor whose cameras are on and off. So just more additional hands in the space. And one more soundbite on the next slide. A parent here, the academic portion is just as, if not more important for obvious reasons. And it reinforces that they are more than just athletes and regular public school students. It teaches them that they are able to accomplish difficult things if they try hard. And it shows them that they are valued, which encourages them to try harder.
All right, so those were the themes. We're going to take a little bit of time just talking about the specific findings that came out of those themes and the series of recommendations that we're making as part of next steps moving forward. The CSI, which is short for the Community School Initiative, we found supported the Jane and Finch community by addressing the gaps that were caused by systemic barriers and circumstances created by COVID-19, intersecting with other factors such as poverty, systemic racism, and so forth. So, whereas often a lot of conversation is around, the achievement gap, we kind of go one step further and say, the achievement gap is actually rooted in the opportunity gap, such as accessing support services, being able to afford glasses, being able to have a caring adult that is accessible on evenings, weekends, 24/7, which kind of connects to the third finding, which I'm talking about now. The achievement gap was actually minimized when we actually focus on the process and access and affordability, which is the opportunity gap. And when we done that, students are more engaged. They are showing up and trying more. They are learning to communicate. They are, getting access to experiential learning and technology. And all of that is kind of creating a more effective teaching and learning environment. This is where, in order to accomplish such programs, going to the finding number 2, there really is potential for reciprocal nonprofit community organizations working side by side private enterprise, such as Spirit of Math, to really mitigate those gaps and increase access to social support programs and services. This is where the school community interface becomes aligned, and hence why the project is called a Community School Initiative, because we know learning just doesn't happen from 9 to 3 or 9 to 4. It's happening particularly evenings and weekends. And that's where there's a big opportunity gap when we look at it across race and socioeconomic status, because students from higher socioeconomic status often have access to structured programming. They're playing structured sport, accessing tutors, more, maybe 2-parent household, caring adults. And we see this gap when we look at when students come back in September. Often students from lower socioeconomic status have dropped in reading and writing levels, whereas students from higher socioeconomic status have maintained or improved over the summer month. And that's because if lower socioeconomic families can't afford access to those programs, what happens is the kids are often just playing outside or watching TV or playing video games. And hence those gaps become widened and intensified over those summer months. Finding number 4 was the team of caring adults, which went beyond the teacher. It went to engaging the coaches in the community, who also have many personal connections and trust and rapport in the community, as well as the coaches, reflected the cultural identities of the students. And so that was very important to kind of have access to a caring adult, whether it was a teacher, coaches, the parents, or the Spirit of Math staff. And when they all worked together collaboratively, it optimized the student achievement because it helped them identify student and family needs and timely supported interventions, such as which students have IEPs, which students need more one-on-one support, how do we support the families navigate submitting assignments by creating those how-to videos. And sometimes there was some disagreements, and that's okay. That was kind of part of having those important constructive dialogues about how to support students and families. So the systems and education component improves and students are able to achieve to their full potential rather than by becoming disengaged from it. This theme was kind of evident in everything else. Our last finding, trust, mentorship, and diverse representation, particularly reflecting the identities of students and the families. It led to higher student engagement, better relationship building, and as a result, greater achievement in the classroom and the teaching and the learning. And this speaks to the larger literature already on the importance of social culturally relevant pedagogy, and coming from the works of Laurier, Latz, and Billings, and more recently, social culturally sustaining pedagogies, which says students are not only should we be teaching them 21st century skills, but they should also be maintaining roots to their cultural heritage and history, which helps them become more engaged. Rooted in the works of Django Paris. So our recommendations, one of them would be greater investments to facilitate access to opportunities and programs that are affordable and accessible to the community with consideration for the demographics of people who live in it. So if you think about it, if the average median income is $37,000 as shared with you earlier in the presentation, we have to keep in mind, which is why YACE works really hard in partnership with others, such as Spirit of Math being a private entity, to make sure access to programs are affordable and subsidized. Another recommendation is really being intentional to invest in holistic and culturally relevant and sustaining programming that rewards diverse identities and lived experiences, right? For example, as I said, many of the teachers in the program, the coaches, they had personal connections, or they even teach within schools in the community, which allows for continuity, trust, and relationship building. And it prioritizes that. And when the trust is there, there's more greater community involvement and greater success for the program. So having, BIPOC, acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, teachers and coaches, working with the students and family, really created that supportive and inclusive environment.
And our third recommendation was to provide multiple avenues and mediums to help parents navigate educational platforms and support their children remotely and at home with consideration for digital literacy. So as we saw before, some of the issues we had were in terms of digital literacy and navigating these apps. So having informational letters, how-to videos, and administrative support might also help with the parental communication and engagement issues that were observed. The fourth one, ignore the fourth one, was to develop and distribute an information package on curriculum and parental expectations with practical tools, examples, and resources to enhance family involvement in supporting student learning. So the more parents are tapped into what's going on in the program, what's being taught, the objectives of the program, the more likely they'll probably be to be engaged with their child's learning and supportive. And then the final recommendation, our fifth one, is ongoing support of teachers and their self-care through flexibility in pedagogy, assessments, and delivery of curriculum. So I think I mentioned earlier how there was a bit of a conflict between how rigid the Spirit of Math curriculum was for the teachers, even though it does have proven impacts, positive impacts. So having flexibility might help those teachers, and creating opportunities for team teaching and hiring additional staff to support high-need students with their exceptionalities. So as someone who's going into teaching and who talks to a lot of teachers, I know there's been a lot of burnout from teachers, especially since all the COVID pandemic restrictions. So having more supports for teachers could be extremely helpful for the students as well as the parents.
And we're just wrapping up this part of our presentation now. It was really important for us to disseminate this knowledge in an accessible place. And so one of the things that we consulted the parents and student advisors on was where and how we should disseminate this knowledge. And together we came up with our blog, which is called the communityschoolinitiative.com. And we'd love for you to check it out. We posted some infographics about key findings on learning and achievement during COVID-19, some infographics and statistics on the Jane and Finch neighborhood, So check it out. And then we've also hosted a one-day-long symposium at the Jane and Finch School where YACE operates, and it included a panel of trustees, parents, students, and we talked all day pretty much about our findings and what we can do to continue this dialogue. Can move to the next slide. So we've just selected some key literature for you all to look over. And finally, but most importantly, we'd like to thank all of our partners in this final slide for providing us with resources, be it financial or otherwise, because their contributions really helped us minimize the opportunity gap, and which also helped contribute to the greater achievement outcomes for racialized students in this community.
Wonderful. And if we have a little bit of time, what I would like to do is just show you a tour of the website and where some of the resources are before we go to the Q&A. So let me just share my screen one more time. And so when you go, we were really intentional. We wanted to kind of take the community with us along the research project. We didn't want to wait till the project was done. So we kind of launched the blog and the research website immediately. As you notice, we didn't want it to be information overload. So we kind of really were selective with defining the community school initiative. If you click the opportunity gap, you'll go to a chapter that really talks about the history of YACE and the social inclusion framework in the context of Toronto. So you can access some of that information. We created a section around resources, and we really targeted certain stakeholders, educators, parents, community partners, and policymakers and students. And based on feedback from the youth advisors and the parents, we didn't want this information just to be for academics. So we did create infographics to supplement some of the big ideas we were exploring. And so if you click that section, you'll see things, from what is asset-based community engagement to racialized learning and employment impact, consideration for program development, benefits of structured programs. From there, we did the literature review. Once again, we posted it, open access. You'll see, we talked about 5 themes. We combined some of them, and if you click it, you will actually be able to access the literature review. As you said, this was done by Sally, Brice, and 4 B.Ed Laurier students. Then we finally had the final report, which we've posted it here. It's called Addressing the Social Determinants of Learning. And if you click it, you're able to access it in PDF. As well as if you go under blog, as we said, when we did the symposium, we were able to record many of the sessions, and they're all there. We had a morning session. We did the study findings. We actually had the parents and students in the community school initiative talking about their experiences. We had another panel with the school trustees around leadership. It's combined into one file there. And if you scroll down, once again, you could download the report here in PDF format, as well as the video we shared with you is there as well as some other stuff we mobilized in terms of knowledge through the Community-Based Research Canada, which was a similar platform to share the findings as well. And the video we showed of you, we showed at the beginning of Devon Talking. That's our first posting we started out. So everything we shared with you is accessible, open access, and is there for you to check out. So I'll stop there. I want to really thank you for attending, and I hope we can continue this work, because we really need to kind of be very intentional to continue to do this work in communities, particularly racialized low-income communities.
All right, so you do have a question. So it starts with a comment, but I'll read the whole thing. It is clear that your approach has a direct impact on student achievement and social impact. What role does the government, both local and provincial, play to help support this work?
I'll pass it on to Devon to start us off, and then we'll take it up others.
Sorry, say that again.
All right, so it is clear that your approach has direct impact on student achievement and social impact. What role does the government, both local and provincial, play to help support this work?
Yeah, so local, I mean, the provincial government, the Ministry of Education is a partial funder of the initiative in some capacity. The research that we have that we've completed, we've shared it with them. The local government being I would say being the school boards, they're involved in some capacity, but not as much as we would want. Um, yeah, it's just buying, and it's called, the initiative is called the community school because we want to we don't want to disrupt what's going on during the traditional school day or the standard school day, but we're saying evenings and weekends, we want the chance to make a difference, working with you and working with your struggling students. It's a simple approach. So I think over time, with the help of Dr. Eizadirad and his team, we can continue to document and demonstrate the efficacy of the work that we're doing and their ability to steward the most marginalized and at-risk students, and by building capacity in them. So, I mean, government can always be of more assistance, but I think you have to get buy-in. You get buy-in and you demonstrate best practices, and I think we're on our way to doing that. So we're still going back and forth with the school boards, and hopefully we can put something tangible in place that makes sense, not just for the kids in YACE, but we want to offer this program to all the kids in the community. So we want the community to know that every day after school, between 4 and 8, there's a free program staffed with incredible teachers and with incredible framework. The same thing on Saturdays and Sundays. So yeah, we definitely need more government involvement, but yes, we'll continue to do the work that we do in community, irrespective of.
And I'll pass it on to Brice and Sally, as graduating social work master students and a BEd and a Master of Education student. What are your takes on this?
I mean, me personally, I'm still learning. Like, I haven't gotten into the classrooms officially yet since I just finished my program, and now I'm looking for jobs. So just being a part of this project and visiting YACE, seeing what they do, showed me the impact of getting support from multiple levels. So I'm trying to learn for myself for once I get into schools, how I can, network and connect with local and provincial government to help support the students that need it most. Because I mean, I've been working with youth for 10 years, not as a teacher, just as a youth worker. And I see a lot of these kids falling through the cracks when they don't need to be. So having programs like YACE, there's also other programs similar to YACE downtown, is important, but they can't act alone. They need a lot of supports. So I'm still a puppy in the game, but I'm definitely learning.
I agree. I think also, like, it would be nice to know maybe more about the red tape or the bureaucratic process of this coming together. But when an initiative like this does go forward, I think it's important to, in terms of the government, to provide as much assistance and not to block or to create more barriers to for projects like this to actually happen. Because I think they're very like at the grassroots level, and with that, obviously we're cautious and we bring a lot of concern and thought into everything. But then also it gets to a point where we can't actually move forward and do the work we need to do.
Yeah, and I would just add, yeah, we need the grassroots support because they're in direct contact with community and through community, so they are able to help map out the immediate and the long-term needs. And I think the research piece is very important, having funding from the different levels of government or in collaboration from the Ministry of Education, because when you're able to kind of show the research aspect of it, it further legitimizes the impact and it gains more attraction and further support. So more grassroots organizations need to be supported to be able to track their impact over time, to then gain further support and do that work and grow and have a larger impact with the direct students and families that they're in regular, consistent contact with.
Perfect. So it looks like that was the only question. So before we finish today, I'm going to invite Dr. Maria Cantilini-Williams in to close us out for the evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was just absolutely touched and impressed by your presentation. Thank you for sharing your passion and for sharing your experiences in working with youth. I personally have also developed some of these programs, mostly with refugees and immigrants, but very many of the same concepts and elements of having a community approach, having a grassroots involvement, lots of mentoring. It seems that you also included sports, which is a great element to engage youth. And I think all of us would agree that we've been inspired, and we hope that together we can maybe get the resources that you need to make this happen, that we need to make this happen, and that it isn't on an ad hoc basis, and that it has to be started over again constantly with without the supports that are necessary. So I applaud you for your efforts, and as Ardavan mentioned and others have said, when you have the research to support the evidence that there is an impact, hopefully people will listen. And it just, like Devin also said, it's a simple idea. Support those that enjoy it and need it most, and hopefully good things will happen. So thank you again for your time tonight, and thank you so much for sharing this community school initiative. And I'll be sure to continue to look at your website and continue to follow you closely. If we can do any more to support you, that would be fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.